I think it's probably safe to say that by the time Woody was able to write these anti-lynching songs, he had gone on a pretty remarkable journey himself, a journey of transformation from thoughtless, casual, youthful Oklahoma racist, which is how he himself began his conscious life, to the ardent anti-racist champion that he eventually became. We know that when he fled the Dust Bowl and blew into California along with 500,000 other migrants from the drought-stricken Midwest, he was quite unconcerned about his own racism because he was known to, he would refer to black people as coons and monkeys and chocolate drops. He would write, when he got out to California, they found this like mock newspaper that he wrote that's just filled with really horrible racist jokes at their expense, and with descriptions of black people bathing on the beach at Santa Monica, giving off the Ethiopian smell with the jungle rhythms pounding in their veins, that kind of stuff. And when he got onto his radio program, he would quite happily use the N-word. But it is true that when he was out in California, he did begin to see his own people, the white Oklahoma migrants, being treated almost as though they were a racial underclass themselves. As I mentioned last night, movie theaters would post signs that say, coloreds and Okies upstairs, or diners would say, no coloreds, dogs, or Okies served here. So this is the beginning of a racial awareness that Woody's beginning to show when his own people are treated as a separate subgroup. There are a number of milestones along the way. I suppose one that we can date quite clearly to about October 20th, 1937, when Woody is on his radio program in Los Angeles. And he announces that he's going to sing a song taken from the Grand Ole Opry, played by Uncle Dave Macon and Gid Tanner and the Skillet Lickers, who I know are your favorites. And I'm sorry to tell you that the name of this old minstrel tune was called Run Nigger Run. He announced it, and he played it. The next day, he gets a letter from an angry member of the audience, and this letter hit him like a slap in the face. And I've seen the letter in the archives, Woody Guthrie archives. I've got it memorized. It was written by a fellow named Howell Terrence. And he writes to Woody, he says, "You were getting along pretty well in your radio program this evening, until you announced your nigger blues. I'm a Negro, a young Negro in college, and I certainly resented your remark. No persons of any intelligence would use that word over the radio." So Woody, he apologized profusely. He read the letter out over the air. He apologized for using the word. He made a big dramatic point of tearing the offending song out of his notebook and tearing it to shreds dramatically in front of the microphone, saying, "You hear that? That's that song disappearing forever, and I promise I'll never sing it again." And as he later said, "I apologize to the Negro people for the frothings that I let slip out of the corners of my mouth." So it's a pretty tough education he's getting out here. And it's helped along the way. He's helped along the way by various people who took him under their wings in the left, the Californian left and the communist movement out there. People like, with names you wouldn't know, Ed Robin, who was a fellow who wrote for the People's World, a fellow named Al Richmond, who was the editor of the People's World. So they're coaching Woody in sort of what anti-racism is about. I suppose the most important person of all out there in terms of working on Woody's consciousness is this fella who probably most of you do not recognize, and you wouldn't recognize him until he grew old enough to be this fella. If anybody remembers Will Geer, Grandpa Walton, and the Waltons, great anti-racist socialist activist in California, became a good friend of Woody Guthrie's. It was Will Geer who introduced Woody to John Steinbeck. And Woody and Will Geer traveled up and down California doing skits and, playing on picket lines and union meetings and various benefits for the Spanish Civil War veterans and things like that. And Nora Guthrie, Woody's daughter, says, "I don't think my dad ever even heard the words, 'that's racism,' until he heard them from Will Geer." Well, in 1940, Will Geer decided he was going to pull up stakes and go out to New York from California. He was going to star in a Broadway show, Tobacco Road. And so he suggested that Woody follow him out there and join the union movement out there, which is how Woody ended up in New York, where one of the first things he did is sit down and write This Land Is Your Land, right? And it was in New York also that he was taken under the wing further by a number of anti-racist and socialist activists, a number of people, very important, but probably the most important person on that side, on the East Coast, would have been this fella. I don't know if you recognize him. He's Alan Lomax. Alan Lomax, the great folk song collector, and he's the archivist of American folk song in the Library of Congress. He's also Woody's champion patron, recorded Woody for the first time in the Library of Congress and got Woody his other recording contracts and a lot of radio contracts and concerts. He was quite an entrepreneur, was Alan Lomax. And I think what was also important is that through Lomax, Woody met and played with a lot of the black musicians whom Lomax had brought up to New York from the South, from the Delta, from the Piedmont. People like Josh Wight, Sonny Terry, and Brownie McGee, and probably the most important of these Lomax finds, Leadbelly. Hootie Ledbetter, who became Woody's best friend. Leadbelly and his wife Martha would often come out of their bedroom in their little apartment in New York and find a down-and-out Woody Guthrie sleeping underneath their kitchen table. Woody did not like beds. He liked sleeping on the floor. And so Woody learned a lot from Leadbelly. He would have heard Leadbelly singing about the Scottsboro Nine. These are 9 young African Americans, boys when they were arrested, but supposedly for the rape of two white women, or the attempted rape. They're sentenced to death in Alabama. It took 20 years for the last of their cases to be overturned, and that was after one of these women actually retracted her charges and went out to campaign actively on their behalf. I believe there was a musical called The Scottsboro Boys just recently on in the West End in London. So Woody would have heard Leadbelly singing about the Scottsboro Boys, and he tried to write songs in the style of Leadbelly about the Scottsboro Boys, not very good. He would have heard Leadbelly singing about the Titanic. In Black American folklore, it was a Jim Crow ship. It was a racist ship where the captain had refused passage to Jack Johnson, the great black boxing champion, supposedly saying to him, "This ship doesn't haul any coal like you." So Woody would have heard Leadbelly singing, "Black man on a jump for joy, never lost a girl or either a boy. I'm singing, fare ye well, Titanic, fare ye well." And Woody tried writing songs about the Titanic in the style of Leadbelly. Not very good songs, right? So as Nora Guthrie also said, that it was Leadbelly who taught her father the most sort of politically, emotionally, and psychologically about what it was like to be black in America, about the black movement, civil rights movement, about black oppression. But I think that in addition to all these particular individuals whom Woody met, I think it was his collective experience, his gathered experience as he grew older, on the road, in California, in New York, but particularly during the Second World War and immediately afterwards, a very important time in the history of American desegregation. During the Second World War, the armed forces are still segregated, right? Now, Woody joined the Merchant Marine in 1944. He made 3 voyages across the Atlantic on what they called Liberty ships. These are the ships that were transporting munitions and soldiers for the D-Day invasion, right? So his ship was torpedoed on two of his 3 journeys. So he kind of earned his stripes there, you know. I think the only other wartime violence that he actually experienced was at the receiving end of a punch in the nose from a right-wing crew member because Woody stood on deck and shouted out to sea, "God bless the Red Army!" Next thing you know, he's lying on his back. Well, Woody was in the National Maritime Union. He was the shipboard secretary. It was one of the few proudly racially integrated unions in the United States, under a communist leadership for a while. And so Woody was a devout union man there, the NMU, National Maritime Union. And he saw a lot going on with the immunity of effectively a civilian seaman, because what would happen, I think there was one voyage, his third voyage, I think, where his ship was transporting about 3,000 GIs, largely most of them from the south, both black and white. Now, the Army would lease these ships and then would impose their own segregationist rules on the ship, so blacks and whites kept separately and all that. But of course, with the immunity of a civilian seaman, Woody would just stroll casually into the black quarters and sing with the black troops. The white GIs would complain that he was breaking the rules, and he'd say, "Well, I only care about the golden rule. You ever hear of that one?" And then they go run to their officers, and say, Guthrie's breaking the rules. And then, so the brass would come out and say, "Well, Mr. Guthrie, none of us made these rules, but we must obey them." And Woody would stare the brass down and say, "It seems to me that the rules nobody made are the hardest to break, ain't they?" And he would just keep on singing. I think another important milestone was after his second voyage, when he's home on leave, and he and Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee go down to Baltimore to play a benefit to raise money for war bonds. Good cause, good democratic cause, right? Anyway, Baltimore's a Jim Crow town. So they play the gig, and then afterwards the organizer comes up and says, "Well, that was a great show. Y'all, Mr. Guthrie, you're welcome to join us at the top table for your lunch, and your friends are welcome to take their lunch in the kitchen." And Woody says, "We just sang together. We're damn well going to eat together." "Well, Mr. Guthrie, you must understand, this is Baltimore. I don't give a damn where this is." And this is the way that Sonny Terry told. He said, Woody jumped up and he said, "We're in a fight against fascism, and this fight has got to start right here and right now." And he's rampaging through the hall. He's tipping over tables and shouting. He's pulling off tablecloths and scattering china, dishes and stuff like that, and screaming. And then Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee hustle him out and say, "Woody, let's get out of here." And later on, Sonny Terry said, "Man, he could have waited till we had our dinner." Anyway, after his merchant marine service, the reason it ended is because Woody had his seaman's papers revoked by the Office of Naval Intelligence because of his communist associations. So that meant he was open to the draft. So on the day of Germany's surrender, in May 1945, when everyone's taken off their uniforms, Woody Guthrie puts his on. U.S. Army Private First Class, and he's sent out to a bunch of boot camps that are still racially segregated. I saw one letter that he sent back to New York from Scott Field, Illinois. It says, "Jim Crow is here, and it is bad." Black and white do get together once in a while in a field for the lectures, but barracks and chow are segregated. Movies are Jim Crowed to hell and gone. But this is like prohibition. We're finally learning what it is that we just don't want to see anymore. Now, after the war, he turned in quick succession to a number of cases involving African American soldiers returning from the war. They'd put their lives on the line to fight and die for democratic values and the triumph of freedom, only to come home and face the indignities of Jim Crow segregation. The first of these was quite a well-known case, a fellow named Isaac Woodard. This is a man who fought bravely in the Philippines and in New Guinea. He came home to receive his discharge, his army discharge. He gets on a bus he goes to Atlanta, gets on a bus, still in his army uniform, to go a couple of states to the north, South Carolina. And the bus pulls in some truck stop in South Carolina where the only facilities fit for human use have a big sign on it that say whites only. He's a veteran in his uniform. He demands to use those facilities. The bus driver refuses and starts swearing at him. Woodard gives as good as he gets and starts swearing back. The bus driver calls the police. The policeman storms the bus and hauls Woodard off the bus in his army uniform. Now, Woody wrote a very long ballad about this. I mean, it was a case that was taken up all around the country, a case led by Orson Welles, the actor. And Woody was part of this crusade for Isaac Woodard. I'll pick up the ballad because it was so long. I'll pick it up at the point where he's hauled off the bus.